I was 3 years old. I was terrified of the dark, and that family locked me in a pitch black closet for 3 years. I slept, toileted, ate, lived, existed in that closet. I was pulled out once a day to be raped by 3 adults and or ritualistically tortured. When you are a victim, then there's self-pity. And the self-pity leads me to a sense of entitlement. You know, the world owes me. You owe me. And in that meeting, I felt the breath of a God in whom I did not believe, blowing on me with a gentleness that I did not deserve, that I had not earned. And I've been sober ever since.
Hello and welcome to 12 Steps and 12 Questions. My name is Silvio and I'm an addict. This pod is full of personal and inspirational stories of recovery from addiction. And in every episode, I'll ask each guest the same 12 questions about their life, addiction, and recovery. Quick warning, there will be some graphic descriptions and a healthy amount of swearing. For this episode, please welcome Jay. Hiya listeners, welcome and come on in for another episode of 12 Steps and 12 Questions. I'm always keen on hearing from anyone with addiction issues who's recovered with the 12 steps, no matter which fellowship. So if this is you or someone you know, just send me an email on 12steps12questions@gmail.com. That's 12 steps, 12 questions @gmail.com. And with that, let's get to my guest for today. I'm so pleased that he's here. Jay, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'd love to. Hey, y'all. My name is Jay Westbrook. I'm an alcoholic. Sober today by God's mercy in the practice of the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous. My sober date is December 2nd, 1988. This is my first sobriety. I'm a product of Southern California sobriety in general and log cabin sobriety specifically, the 7:30 a.m. Monday through Friday, West Hollywood log cabin, which has always been my home group. I've been in Los Angeles a lifetime, and 29 months ago, picked up and moved to Tupelo, Mississippi, and I'm loving Tupelo. I love the recovery here. It's great recovery. All that time, and then some in Los Angeles. I was a bedside hospice nurse and grief recovery counselor. And when I moved here 29 months ago, I left the hospice nursing behind and just have a practice here, grief recovery of Tupelo, working with people who are struggling with grief and loss, whether it's a death-related loss or a non-death-related loss. And I found wonderful recovery. And the last thing I'll say in my intro is just when I was getting ready to move to Tupelo, people said, now, do you know people? Do you have family there? And my response was no, but I'm in Alcoholics Anonymous and I have family and community anywhere and everywhere I go. And that's been my experience.
And it sounded so wonderful. Everything sounded so amazing. We could almost just say, thank you so much, Jay. This was amazing, but we've got 12 questions to go through. Now,
okay.
Before I start with question one, I have heard your share before on Rico 12. And so I feel almost a little bit funny about asking this, but it is the question that we have. Our question one of the 12 questions is, Jay, did you have any adverse childhood experiences?
You ask that as though there might be someone who doesn't. I think we probably all, to a greater or lesser degree, have adverse childhood experiences. I certainly did, and little trigger warning, some of this will be explicit, but it will be married to some real positives that came out of it. So yeah, my childhood couldn't have been much worse. Mom went out the door when I was 5 months old. I don't know why, never came back. Dad remarried when I was 2. When I was 3, my dad and stepmom wanted to focus on their careers, and so they gave me away to what I hope they thought was a good family, and they weren't. So I was 3 years old. I was terrified of the dark, and that family locked me in a pitch black closet for 3 years. I slept, toileted, ate, lived, existed in that closet. I was pulled out once a day to be washed, raped by 3 adults, and or ritualistically tortured. And there was an inverse relationship between the sex and the torture. If I was positive, enthusiastic with the sex, there was less torture. If I was resistant or reluctant or anything like that, there was more torture. Pulled out of that situation when I was 6, pretty damaged, as you might imagine, lost sanity and
Yes.
safety and security and trust and innocence, but was back with my parents a year later when I was 7. I don't know why, but we lived in New York City. They got an apartment in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and put me in that apartment by myself. And they came up every weekend, but I was alone all week. I made cold cereal for breakfast and canned ravioli or spaghetti for dinner. And they had another person, a man in that apartment building that had the key to our apartment and kind of was there to look after me. And he was a predator. And so I went through another year of being raped, abused, molested, whatever you want to call it. And at 7, my parents moved up there. And periodically, because predators can spot prey, I would be re-victimized. And then when I think I was 15 or 16, I'm not sure, moved to California. And that's where that kind of predation ended.
Yeah.
But yeah, and we moved so much. So I'm a high school dropout. I went to 16 schools in 11 years. So always the new kid, never did 1 year at one school. I would have told you before sobriety that I was excluded, ignored, never made a part of. And that may have some truth to it, but there's got to be an equal amount of my being withdrawn and isolating and doing absolutely nothing to try and engage or become a part of.
Yes. Now, to state the obvious, this is probably the worst start anyone can have in life. Can I just ask a couple of other questions? Did you have any brothers and sisters?
No brothers and sisters.
Right. Okay.
Only child, yeah.
And once your parents, quote unquote, returned, were you able to communicate with them? Were you able to say what had happened to you? Were you able to ask why they'd gone and then returned?
I don't know that I asked those questions, but I'm old, and there was a period of time that back then it was very different than today. Children were not believed. Children were thought to be resilient, and it doesn't help to talk about this and bring it up. They'll get over it. They'll forget it. They'll move on. They're resilient. They don't need help. Children's memories are not very sophisticated. There just wasn't any of the knowledge that we have today. And so not only did we not talk about it and not get help, my parents did not cut off ties to that family. We still would go and visit them. I just wouldn't be left there. I wouldn't stay overnight. They knew something had happened. They were not interested in saying I had been threatened in ways that made me as tight-lipped as could be. I wasn't going to say anything, so.
You were too scared to talk, I guess.
Yeah. There's another side to it, though, because this is pretty horrendous stuff. And people always say, when I speak and they say afterwards, I'm so sorry that happened to you. My God, that was just like amazingly horrible. I had a little this, but it wasn't as bad. So all of that is true, that it was absolutely horrible. Out of it, I lost all those things I said: sanity, serenity, security, trust, innocence, ability to say no and have it be heard and respected. I lost boundaries. I acquired PTSD. I acquired a malfunctioning alarm system my alarm system, and it lasted for decades, said people equals unsafe, alone equals safe. So it didn't put me in a position to have very happy, successful romantic relationships. It taught me to separate sex and intimacy. I confused comfortable and familiar, and that led to horrendous behavior. So there was a lot of loss. That being said, out of that experience came PTG, which is post-traumatic growth. It's an academic psychological reality, and you can Google PTG, post-traumatic growth, which, yes, I have PTSD, but I also have PTG, and I'm so grateful for that. It taught me to endure. It taught me how to dissociate. And later on, when I ended up in the penitentiary being gang raped and gang beaten, that ability to dissociate was invaluable. If this horrible stuff would be happening, I'd be up on the ceiling watching me, out of body, completely watching me be ravaged and beaten and kicked, and I wasn't present. I wasn't in my body. What a horrible way to acquire it, but what a gift that was. I learned how to compartmentalize, and the suffering was so profound. I ended up with a relationship with suffering, and my suffering became my vehicle for awakening compassion in me and for others. And it taught me how to be with suffering. Just be. And as a hospice nurse and grief counselor, it's why I've been so incredibly effective in that field, is I can be with great comfort and ease with profound suffering, physical, spiritual, emotional, intellectual, whatever the kind of suffering is. I just wanted to balance the horrendous with saying there were some amazing things that came out of it, which I would, if you gave me a wand and said you can undo it, it would be like, I hope it never happens to someone else. But no, I would not take this out of my past.
It's an incredibly strong thing to say. I mean, I considered earlier whether I should join, the chorus of "I'm so sorry, Jack," and so on and so forth. And you sort of beat me to it a little bit there with what you were saying. I think the fact that you've taken this growth out of it is absolutely amazing and a true testament to human resilience. Let's very quickly circle back to our question one, and just for one more second before we carry on to question two, and that is, if you had to take away a few things, a few words, emotions from those days, what was it that you felt was very profound or was prevalent? Was it the betrayal of your parents? Was it the cruelty that was inflicted on you? What were the main, do you find that the main quote unquote, I want to say takeaways is a terrible word, the things that left the biggest mark, if you will?
Well, I think I already identified the positive ones. Mm-hmm. The negative ones were, one of the biggest was at 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, with 3 adult perpetrators, it was not safe to express my rage and hate towards them. So I learned to turn it inward. I learned how to hurt myself with my wounds, and that behavior lasted for decades. And that was probably the most damaging. The other thing that I learned or 2 things that I learned were worth and value and role and purpose. And my worth and value were to stick a dick in, period. And my role and purpose were to please you sexually, period. Beyond that, that was my sole function. That was it. That's who I was. And that also lasted for a long time and created behavioral patterns that were so self-sabotaging and corrosive and shame-producing.
Question 2 is, what did the moment you first got hooked, quote unquote, the fun times, if there were any, what did that look like? So here we are, you're a deeply, deeply traumatized person. At this point, I don't think there wasn't any PTG, or maybe not much from, because that would have come, a lot later with a lot of spiritual work. And at some point, drugs or alcohol were introduced into your life, right? What did that look like? And what did that do for you at that time, what you couldn't do for yourself?
Yeah, the word hooked just doesn't resonate with me. I was 15 or 16 when we moved to California. About a year later, probably 15 when I was 16, I found drugs and alcohol. I had just started my senior year of high school. And one day I left for school and instead got on a bus to downtown LA to the Greyhound station and got a bus out to San Bernardino and got off the bus and stuck my thumb out. And 72 hours later, I was in New York, Greenwich Village, and doing the life in Greenwich Village when people were playing little basket houses, people who went on to play stadiums, and become the Bob Dylans, the Richie Havens, the Buffy St. Murray, people like that, and we just smoked pot, and there was safety and carefree and dropped shoulders and exhaling, and just it was a sweet time. There wasn't a sense of being hooked. I mean, there were in the East Village, there were junkies who were sticking needles in their arms and doing heroin. That's not what I was a part of. It lasted, I don't know how long, and then hitchhiked back to Los Angeles. And I was 17 and I got a job at the Troubadour. And the Troubadour was the hottest club in the world. People who went around the world playing stadiums came to Los Angeles and played this little 400-seat club. They did 14 shows in 6 days. And Monday was the amateur night, and all of the people who went on to become huge in Southern California, country rock or whatever you want to call it, the Jackson Browns and Linda Ronstadts and Glenn Fry's and all of those, the people who were in the Eagles, and that they all came out of that amateur night, hoping Doug Weston, the owner of the Troubadour, would book them as an opening act for someone. And we who worked at the Troubadour, whether we worked as waiters or waitresses or the doorman or the ticket sales or the bar, we were like family. And we all got high together, and nobody was doing hard drugs until we were. But, we were drinking and smoking some hash and some pot and doing a little psychedelics, and it was very sweet.
This would have been the mid-'60s?
Yeah. Yeah, I worked there from 64 to 72, and or 71. The sweet years when all those acts were emerging, and then there was, I can't remember the event, somewhere up in the Bay Area, Altamont or something like that, a rock concert, and the Hells Angels were the security, and they ended up killing somebody. And there was a change culturally at that time. And that's about the same time hard drugs, not heroin yet, but cocaine came into my life. And it wasn't quite as cute and gentle and fun. There was bigger dollars involved. There was some serious stuff because there was serious money. And things started to change. But the question about what the fun times looked like, that was it. Going to love-ins and going to music festivals, and there wasn't any violence at them, and you could sit in the park and take acid and smoke joints and listen to music and feel a part of. It was a sweet time culturally and in my own life. And it preceded some very, very, very dark times.
Which we'll come to in a second. in that time, the sweet time, as you call it, you're hanging out, you're part of the counterculture. I mean, everybody knows about this. It's a sort of fabled period in for anybody who's, interested in music and so on. And when you were using, what were you, and did you have no consequences at this point at all?
Yeah, alcohol was probably all three. There was some wine, there was some beer, and there was certainly lots of tequila. It just kind of depended. We were all working, so nobody was getting inappropriately drunk at work, and it was a nightclub, so we all kind of watched out for each other, and then maybe partied more after we got off. And like I said, there were psychedelics. There was acid and mescaline and peyote and and there were pills. There were uppers, cross whites, the little benzodrine tablets that would better living through chemistry. If you started to get a little too much alcohol on board, you take a couple of those, and and then the cocaine started to get introduced. But it was still like people were snorting cocaine. There wasn't a lot of injecting it, shooting it. There wasn't. People hadn't started making freebase, which eventually became done on a more commercial basis, and people were selling crack, but it was the same as freebase. It was like the one you had to make yourself, and the other it was already done for you. And that hadn't happened yet. So neighborhoods, lives, neighborhoods, families, neighborhoods, communities weren't being ravaged.
Yeah. And did you have any thoughts about any sort of concerning thoughts about your drinking and using at this time, or you're just having a good time?
Just having a good time.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And that is one of the reasons why we get hooked, because you don't get hooked if you don't have a good time. If it doesn't do something for you that you can't do for yourself. So our question 3, I'm obviously quite aware that this is, depending on who we speak to and their lives, certainly also in my case, this covers quite a vast amount of time. But our question 3, what were your worst consequences? And finally, your rock bottom.
The only thing I didn't mention, there was also the cultural change starting to go on from Camelot, when we had the series of the four assassinations of Malcolm X, of JFK, of Martin Luther King, and RFK, and they seemed to happen one after the other. And this idea of Camelot and hope and positivity and maybe naivete and went away. And things became darker, and things became more money and focused, and with that came a level of violence and guns and what have you. So that's what happened to me. I mean, the drug use progressed. I got into, although cocaine and alcohol and pot were always the 3 mainstays, there was dabbling in needles and opiates, and I had a brother-in-law who was very into that. He was a little older. He came from the Beatnik era and Big Sur and hanging with Jack Kerouac and those kinds of. There was a real darkness, and he was also into guns and introduced me to that world, and I kind of went along to get along and became a little fascinated and got real altered on the substances, and my world got dark. And I forgot to say earlier, I was raised atheist. And what I'll say is that the drugs I was doing made me stupid. The stupidity led to bad decision-making. The decision-making put me in front of a power greater than myself in spite of being an atheist. And his name was Judge William Ritzian. My first ever encounter with the criminal justice system. He sentenced me to double 5 to life in the penitentiary. And man, I did not want to go, because I had this stunningly beautiful wife, Nancy, who was kinder than she was beautiful, but she was movie star beautiful. And I didn't have any fear of going. I didn't know anything. I didn't even know there was a difference between jail and prison. And off I went, and it took 5 hours to find the difference. And coming up from Chow Hall the very first night, 5 guys grabbed me. I'm just like walking along and not guarded or I didn't know. 5 guys grabbed me, beat me almost to death, and gang raped me. And that's who I was. Once that happens in the penitentiary, that's who you are. And it was horrendous. Except for what I said earlier, I had learned how to dissociate and just watch this horrible stuff happening to this guy. It happened to be me, but I was on the ceiling watching it, and he being just each time raped and beat silly. And
how long did this go on for?
I ended up getting called back by the judge who had sentenced me after 18 months. And the attorney had approached him. And if I had one attorney who, long story, was not a good attorney. We got a second attorney. He approached the judge, and he called me back after 18 months and changed the sentence to a suspended sentence. But there's something important that I want to say, because it may be the experience of some of your listeners, male or female. And amongst those of us who are survivors of rape, certainly not every one of us, and certainly not every one of us who have been multiply raped, it doesn't happen every time. But there were a couple of times in the penitentiary when on the inside, I'm screaming, "No!" And on the outside, if you were an observer, you would have said, he's encouraging it, he's enjoying it, he wants it. And at the time, you're just trying to live through the experience. And in the afterwards, the shame and trauma of that reaction, being betrayed by a body made by God, who made us spiritual beings and human beings and sexual beings and emotional and intellectual beings. But part of it is sexual, and there are nerve endings and there are hormones and the shame and trauma of having responded in that way, even though it was a minority of the times, was harder to deal with than the trauma of the rape itself. And so when I got out of there, I went back to the lifestyle. I also got a lot of letters after my name. Went to school, got a lot of letters, did a lot of cocaine, studied really hard, worked part-time, 20 hours a week, and carried a full load, and got a 4.0 at junior community college, went into USC on full scholarship. I mean, I had an amazing path, went into graduate school, got my nursing degree, and
how was your drinking and using in this time?
A lot of cocaine and a lot of pot and a lot of liquor.
But you were able to study, you were able to, quote unquote, perform. You were, I don't like the word, but let's call it functional.
Yeah, absolutely. 4.0. And because of what I learned at 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 years old, and what was reinforced in the penitentiary, my only worth and value are to stick a dick in, and my only role and purpose are to please you sexually. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about the cycle of spree and remorse. And it talks about it in terms of drinking. But I got to tell you that the spiral, not just the cycle on spiral of spree and remorse also took place for me in the sexual arena. And I'm a straight guy with a stunningly beautiful wife, and I'm in the gay baths. And I'm replicating what happened to me at 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and what happened to me in the penitentiary. And I'm being used, and I'm desperate to hear those words. Attaboy, good job, you're good. And that all it meant was you're great because you have no boundaries You let us do anything and everything, and with no investment, emotional, financial, or any other kind. It was just like, and it was always I haven't been there for decades, but back then the gay baths were filled at night with young, buff, gay men, and that's not when I went. I went during the day, and they were filled with middle-aged and mature married men, almost all with wedding rings on, and that, the shame that came out of that was unbearable. And so I'd get loaded, and once I was loaded, I'd go back, and then the shame of having done it. And I'd go home, and Nancy would look at me with this loving look in her eyes, and I would start a fight so I could push her away. And to myself, I would say, what is wrong with her that she would love a piece of shit?
This is so incredibly complex, isn't it? In that you have indescribable trauma on the one hand, and what it does to you, right? And then out of that come these, what you called your values, or what gives you value as a human being, stick a dick in and please someone sexually, which in turn then, if I'm understanding it correctly, leads to so much more self-loathing and so on that there was before, so that you need to medicate these feelings, and then you act out again and you push those who really truly care about you away. It's an incredibly complex, I mean, the way you describe it is so clear, but at the time, it must have been just an indescribable mishmash.
Yeah, and there were two other parts. One is that I didn't understand intellectually that there's a difference between comfort and comfortability and familiarity. So I would go into these situations and I would say they're comfortable, and they weren't. They were familiar. And if you don't understand the difference, think about a toddler, and you're trying to toilet train a toddler. They don't resist toilet training and stay in a diaper, a shitty, sticky, stinky diaper because it's comfortable. They stay because it's familiar, and you're trying to get them to sit in this plastic seat that hangs over a white porcelain bowl with water in it, and it's not familiar. And as humans, we're neophobic. We're afraid of new things. So it's difficult to toilet train a child because they're grasping to the familiar. They're resisting the unfamiliar, not because of comfort, because of familiarity. So that's what I was doing, was holy. And the thing that I said earlier of at 3, 4, 5, and 6, where it was unsafe to turn my hate and anger and rage at my perpetrators, I learned to turn it towards myself and to hurt myself with my wounds. And so then as an adult, I'm doing the same thing, shooting myself in the foot, self-sabotaging again and again and again, because that's the neural pathways were already established, and that's what let the dopamine flow. And I have a sponsee, a very funny woman who says it's about the dopamine, and whether it comes from a drink, a drug, a dick, or a donut, it doesn't matter. It's like I gotta have the dopamine, and that's part of what drove what I was doing.
Yeah, it's a pretty good little list that she's made there.
Yes. So the last thing to answer that question about rock bottom, when I finally hit bottom, and it made it difficult, that second half of step 1, and your life is unmanageable. Here's what my life looked like at the very rock bottom. I'm married to this beautiful, kind woman. We have a lovely apartment in West Hollywood. I drive a nice car. I make a nice paycheck. I'm wearing suit and tie, and I'm associate director of medical research at a children's hospital in Los Angeles. Now, Nancy and I never had kids because we don't like them. Thank God we didn't have them. There are people who like them don't like them and have them anyway. We didn't like them. We didn't have them, but that's alcoholism. I'm working at a children's hospital.
I was just about to say that. Yes. Okay.
And I'm armed at a children's hospital. I mean, that's insanity. And I'm in a job that I hate. serving a population, children, I don't like. And the reason I stay is because I've got a business card with a title that says Associate Director of Medical Research. And I know I'm a piece of shit and I can't impress you, but maybe this business card will. And I just reached a point where I could not do it for one more day. I'm in the job I hate. I love my wife so much and she loves me, but we're distanced. We're behaviorally, we're inappropriate. We're both addicts and alcoholics in the height of our disease. I'm still acting out in the baths and filled with and I just couldn't. And so I decided to kill myself. And all I can say is thank God I'm an alcoholic, because I was armed and I could have just put the gun in my mouth and pulled the trigger and you would have had a different guest today. But because I'm an alcoholic, I'm grandiose and I'm arrogant. And I said, if I can stage this to look like an accident, I'll be out of my misery. Nancy will be better off without me. And those life insurance, the accidental death life insurance policies will kick in and she'll have a bunch of money. And so I structured it to look like an accident.
What kind of accident?
Motor vehicle accident on the Hollywood freeway. The signs are very clear about what this minimum speed limit is. And yet when the garbage trucks are loaded and they're going up that ramp by the Hollywood, passing the Hollywood Bowl, they're going about 15 or 20 miles an hour. And I just knew that going ahead and riding my motorcycle into the back of one at about 100 miles an hour, and then Nancy filing the lawsuit that those are known entities that are going well below the legal speed limit and nothing has been done about it. So there was negligence and therefore those policies would kick in.
It's very clever. It's very sad, but it's very clever.
And I think this dovetails into the next question. Do you want to ask it or should I?
Question 4. Did you ever want to die? At your worst, did you consider suicide? Obviously, the question you answered there. I've got a quick question, just very, very quickly. Returning to our question 3. You're drinking and using in those months, maybe, or even a year or so before your rock bottom. What did that look like? Did it accelerate or was it always stable?
It probably decelerated. There were no needles anymore.
You were an intravenous user by that point?
Yeah, not by that point. I had been previously. Certainly in that time before prison, I was, and for a little bit afterwards, after I got out. But then that fell away. It was just the stable 3. It was hard liquor, very seldom beer or wine, hard liquor, pot, and snorting cocaine.
Yeah. At that time,
that was it.
And that's enough, really. But at that time, so this is before you said grandiose, so let's just go with that. Before that grandiose plan and so on and so forth, how aware were you that your using and your drinking were killing you? How aware were you that they were so problematic and that you could not go on like this for much longer?
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe.
I don't think I was, because I'm a victim. And I mean, I'm a victocrat. It's I think, Larry Elder term, but it doesn't just mean I'm a victim. It means that's my identity and my mindset. I'm a victim.
Sure.
And here's the deal with that. When you are a victim, then there's self-pity. And the self-pity, I'm such a victim, I've been so wrong, leads me to a sense of entitlement. You know, the world owes me. You owe me because of how I've been victimized. So I get this sense of entitlement, which then leads me to expectation that you're going to behave in certain ways that will please me and fix me. And when you don't, I get really angry and resentful and self-righteous. And you know what? I'll show you, I'll hurt me. And that's the cycle that keeps repeating. And so I drink more or I drug more. Victim, self-pity, entitlement, expectation, disappointment, self-righteous anger. I'll show you, and I'm loaded.
Rinse and repeat.
Rinse and repeat again and again and again. I have a friend here in Tupelo, Mississippi named Teresa, and Teresa's got long-term sobriety. And she says, victims get drunk. Honey, victims get drunk. And what a true line. And I was a victim. So I didn't see that this was, the only place I saw it was I wanted to be a veterinarian, and that part-time work, I was working 20 hours a week all the way through to my bachelor's degree. And I had a 4.0 going into my last semester, and I'd had classes like immunology and microbiology and 8 semesters of chemistry. And I mean, I was taking serious classes, that required knowledge built on knowledge built. So I was learning, not just memorizing. And I was shooting dope that last semester in the bathroom at school. And I had histology and embryology and immunology that semester, and I excelled in immunology, but the histology and embryology required microscope work. And I would look in that microscope and everything was moving, but it really wasn't. And I just couldn't distinguish the subtle nuances that you had to, and I ended up with 2 C's in those 2 classes, my only non-A's in my whole academic career. And it was enough to keep me out of veterinary college. And that I had been telling everyone I'm going to veterinary, didn't get in. And that was that's when I stopped using, injecting drugs. And I realized that they had taken my dream. And then I pivoted and I got my graduate degree and my nursing degree. And now I'm so grateful I'm not a veterinarian and dealing with animals who were suffering. I couldn't imagine. I know what to do with people. It'd be much harder with animals.
So thankfully, you didn't ride your motorcycle in the back of those pesky garbage trucks, and you're still here and you're my guest today. Nonetheless, though, you hit a rock bottom and you came into the rooms. Did you come straight into the rooms then, or?
Yeah, well, here's what happened. I grandiose, so I make the plan, and it had to be on a Tuesday or Friday between 3 and 5 o'clock. And I'm sitting there on Friday, December 2nd, 1988, watching the clock, getting ready to go. And a public service announcement came on the television that I'd seen 99 times and thrown the finger. And that day I burst into tears and I picked up the phone. And 90 minutes later, I was in a meeting. And in that meeting, I felt the breath of a God in whom I did not believe, blowing on me with a gentleness that I did not deserve, that I had not earned. And I've been sober ever since.
Quite a neat segue there, really, to our question 6, which is, when you came in, did you struggle with the word God? Now, you said earlier that you were raised an atheist. I myself came to this program as a staunch agnostic, even though that seems to be an oxymoron, but nonetheless. And I know that I did, and I know that many atheists did struggle. Did you struggle?
Oh, yeah. So I came into that program. I came into that meeting, that I had that moment where there was a veil of grace. It's one of Teresa's terms. And a veil of grace was thrown on me. And I felt the breath of God, and it came and it went. And that was Cocaine Anonymous, that Friday night meeting. And at the end of the meeting, they said, honey, you were sicker than most. And I said, thank you. They said it wasn't a compliment. It was an observation. You're really sick. You'd probably benefit from morning meetings. We're cocaine addicts. We don't do anything in the morning. Go to Log Cabin. It's AA, but you can talk about drugs. It's on Robertson and Melrose in West Hollywood. So I went, and it's West Hollywood, commonly called Boys Town. It's a largely gay section of West Hollywood. And there was a gay boy in a pink shirt standing at the top of the steps. 4 steps go up into the cabin, and it's a little old log cabin. And he took one look at me, and he knew I was new. And he said, Hi, honey. Welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. If you leave your fantasies at the door, all of your dreams can come true in AA if you're willing to work for them. And I about fell over. I was 3 days sober. It was Monday, December 5th, 1988. And he heard that. I heard that, and I'd never considered it. And I was living this fantasy. And the fantasy was, if I hand you this business card that says Associate Director of Medical Research, you'll be impressed. You weren't. And my dream was to work with the dying, and I was ignoring it. And that meeting ended with 3 days sober. And I already, I walked in the rooms with the vocabulary of the newcomer, which sort of sounds like this. No. Oh, that won't work. Well, even if it works, it won't work for me. I know. Those were the standard responses that I had.
Find it hard not to chuckle a bit too loudly at this. Yes, those are the classic newcomer terms. Yes.
Oh my God. And looking up and seeing the steps and the traditions, but mainly the steps, and it said, God. It's like, no, that's not going to work for me. And, but what happened was while I was trying to shut my ears and convince me of no, I heard the music of Alcoholics Anonymous. I heard some laughter, and I heard some honesty, and I heard some vulnerability that just let me exhale. My shoulders dropped, and feelings started running down my cheeks from my eyes, and it was terrifying. And that meeting ended, and I got in my car at 8:30 a.m. and I drove into the hospital and quit my job.
Yay!
That day. Don't make any big decisions in your first year. Well, just 3 days. Quit my job, drove on downtown to County Hospital, big LA County USC Medical Center, serving the poorest of the poor, massive hospital, 2,000 beds. And I got a job as a cancer nurse, and I did it for a year.
This is entirely off script, but I can't help but ask, why did you have this dream of working with the dying? It's the one thing I suppose that many people would rather not do. That, right? Why? What is it about that?
Don't know. Just pulled. I was working next door to Log Cabin at Miller Animal Hospital, all through my bachelor's degree. And I was the guy who ran out into the parking lot when someone had put their dog down or brought their dog in, hit by a car, and it died. And I was the one who went out in the parking lot and kind of did seat of my pants grief counseling. I didn't know anything. But the suffering, I knew how to be with suffering from my childhood. Cultivated that relationship. It became my vehicle for awakening compassion in me and for others. And so I just was a calling. There was a pull. And so I was a cancer nurse for a year. And then I got recruited to the pain management service for a year. And then I made the leap to hospice. And here's what happened, because you asked, did you struggle with the word God? And I already got the point, because I heard it in How It Works every day. God could and would if he were sought. And I had that first meeting experience where I had almost like a flasher, like God had exposed himself and then covered up and disappeared. And I became a seeker and got exposed to lots of different ideas for God, and none of it. And then I got to hospice and home hospice. I'm going from one dying person's house to another. I'm going out in the middle of the night on these death calls, and here's what happened. the place where life and death meet is filled with God. Period. Not a thought, not a question, not a hypothesis, not a theory. For me, it was an experiential certainty that totally rocked my world. Like, how can this be? There is no God. God is the opiate of the masses. It's only meant to control people. Don't ever believe in. I'm just parroting all the stuff that my parents had told me. But if you asked me, why don't you believe in God? I would tell you, because I'm a scientist. And I'm not. I just had a lot of science classes. I had a lot of physics. I had 8 semesters of chemistry. I had the math. I had anatomy and physiology and microbiology and immunology and histology and embryo and blah, blah, blah. But a scientist is curious, investigative, open-minded, and I was explorative. I was none of those things. I just parroted what I was told as a child. And suddenly there was God, and I couldn't deny it. And I had to figure out how that God could work with my history, my story. And it took a while, but I got there. So here's where I got to. There's a loving God that designed it, created it, put it in motion, and gave us free will. And that God never leaves my side. It's a co-journeying God and a co-suffering God, but a non-intervening God. My God does not intervene, but co-suffers. So watched me being raped at 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 years old and wept at my suffering, and then looked at my rapists and wept at their suffering, that they'd moved so far from his grace, but did not intervene because he made them with everything they needed for redemption and made me with everything I needed for resilience. And I don't know if they reached for it, but I did, first through drugs and alcohol. And when that stopped working, then through the powerful fellowship and transformative 12 steps and 12 traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's where I found my resilience.
This is a very deep, people call it philosophical. I'm not quite sure whether it is that, but these thoughts and these experiences and what it amounts to runs so incredibly deep. And the heart of the issue so often with the struggle with the word God and with the concept God is what in philosophy is called the problem of evil. You know, how could there be, right? We've all heard it. How could there be an all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowing God, right? When there is so much suffering and quote-unquote evil in the world. And this I only found out later in recovery. There's a whole branch of philosophy called theodicy. That's what it is, theodicy, which is all about trying to explain or trying to find potential answers to this question, to this very question: why do bad things happen to good people? The thing that makes so many of us lose the will to believe in God or in a loving God from the beginning, right? And you've really gone to the heart of how you have found an answer for that for yourself. And I think that is so admirable. And it is something, I guess, that has to happen in one way or another. And most of us, I suppose, don't have the cruelty in their lives that you have had to endure, right? But most of us have to find some sort of peace with that question, even if we don't find an answer, I think.
I'm not an entomologist, but my understanding is that when there's a cocoon and the butterfly is trying to come out of that cocoon, if you take a tweezers and open the cocoon for it, that it will never fly. That the struggle to get out and then to move its wings releases certain chemicals that are necessary for full development of the wings. And that without the struggle, the butterfly dies without ever flying. I'm not sure that's true, but I've seen it in, not just on Facebook. I've seen it written, on Abraham Lincoln's page. So all of us suffer, everybody. everybody suffers at some point. Some people have idyllic childhoods, like my wife, and she still turned into a drug addict and alcoholic. I know my suffering as a child didn't make me alcoholic. It gave me an excuse to drink and something to put in your face if you criticized it. But we ended up with exactly the same disease and the same solution, and our backgrounds couldn't have been different. But everybody suffers and struggles with one thing or another. And it's in that struggle that our life develops meaning. I mean, if everything was just, a day on the beach in Bali, sipping whatever they drink in Bali, some drink with fruit and umbrellas in it, and, watching sunsets, and it's always balmy. How do you then develop depth and character and empathy and compassion if there wasn't suffering? And the suffering is because of free will. I don't know who they are, but they say in today's world, we could end hunger tomorrow. It's not a shortage of food. It has to do with the distribution and the economics of food, and the same with the water. And, we have free will, and it allows some people to advance their material wealth or material position by exploiting or at the expense of other people. And they take the low road, and they do that. Okay. So it doesn't mean there isn't a God. When Nancy died 11 weeks to the day after our 42nd wedding anniversary, in my arms, in our home, on hospice with pancreatic cancer. Broke my heart and her heart. And I stayed sober. And people say, don't you hate God? Aren't you angry at God for taking Nancy? And my response is always, God didn't take Nancy. The pancreatic cancer took Nancy. God was there to receive her. Did I pray for a miracle? Yeah. Did I get one? Yeah. God received Nancy. Wasn't the miracle I was praying for, but third step, we turn our will and our life over to the care of God. That means I'm going to do God's work, not God's job. So it's not Jay's job to dictate what that miracle is. I just get to ask for one. And it may be one that I did not want, but it was a miracle. God was right there to receive her and welcome her.
You have a habit of sort of foreshadowing the next question, and which in this case is question 7. How do you experience your higher power today?
Gently, tenderly, humbly, continuously. I'm a big believer in that we see what we look for, and we hear what we listen for. So you got to be listening for God. You got to be looking for God. And when you do, I don't know how you fail to see it. I live now in Tupelo, Mississippi. I've got a beautiful home on 2 acres. I'm looking at my bird feeders right out here. There are 3 red cardinals eating from the bird feeder. There's a cat watching the birds, but the bird feeders are too high for the cat to get to, and I can't imagine how frustrating. There are these beautiful 80-foot pine trees that I can't even see the top of. They're hawks. I've got 38 acres of forest right next to me with deer, and so there's all the nature. And then I look in our rooms and I see the miracles, and I think about how blessed I am to have the sponsor that I have. I've had Kathy for the last 25 and a half years, and of my 35 and a half years. And And I see God in her and in her message. And she tells me, honey, go through the doors that are open. Go through the doors that are open. And I used to say things like, well, this shoulder's not broken. Can't I take one more run at the closed door? And she would say, well, of course you can. But my suggestion is you go through the doors that are open. And when I look for open doors and go through them, there they are, and things go full circle. I said, I'm a high school dropout, and I got a call saying this is the selection committee at Harvard Medical School, and we'd like to offer you a position as a 10-month position as a visiting faculty scholar at the medical school, followed by a 2-year consulting faculty scholar at the medical school. It's like, oh my God. So of course I went and started to decompensate. I got there about a day and a half early and started to spin out and looked, and there was a lunchtime meeting at MIT, which is right down the road, very close to Harvard. And so I went, and it was deans and janitors and students and professors and administrative assistants. It was everybody from campus who was in AA, and I had a meltdown and cried, and don't they know I'm an ex-con and a drug addict and an alcoholic and a high school dropout and an incest survivor. I'm a piece of shit, and they're making a mistake. And everybody laughed and said, oh yeah, that's how we felt when we were coming on board here at MIT. Except one dean, and when it got to him, he just said, you are just about the most arrogant fuck I've ever heard. And I was like, no, I'm the guy who's like getting all the sympathy. And he said, Harvard Medical School happens to be what is probably the greatest medical school on the planet. And they have a selection committee, and you're sitting here in your arrogance telling us that you know better than that selection committee who they should choose. How dare you? Who do you think you are? Why don't you just say, thank you? Just say thank you and show up. It was some of the greatest direction I've ever gotten. And it changed my whole attitude in how I showed up, with greater humility and greater willingness to walk and step into my position there, and to remember why I was there, to help train other clinicians and student clinicians in this emerging field of palliative care, in which I'm considered a pioneer and a visionary, and I'm so honored. I just happened to be there at the right time. But I got that title and lots and lots and lots of awards, and holy shit. It's like,
it's a miracle.
How does that happen? It's amazing. Yeah. The other thing that when I was doing my incest healing, which started in the rooms of the women of Alcoholics Anonymous saved my life. Because they met Nancy, they knew Nancy, they knew we were a couple, they knew we were absolutely committed to one another and exclusive with one another. We went through that change in very early sobriety. There's a guy named Dr. Paul who wrote a story in the big book, 449 in the third edition, 417 in the newer edition. He's the paragraph on acceptance. And he and his wife, Maxine, he calls her Max, he and his wife started a do-it-yourself couples communication workshop, annual workshop in Lake Arrowhead at the UCLA Convention Center every year. And this is the 40th year, and it's the first weekend in October. And we went that first, we heard about it. I had 6 months, Nancy had 3 months, and we went. And we repledged our love, and we said we're going to try this new thing, because we were both sluts and cheaters and liars and thieves. And we're going to try monogamy and fidelity. And we took to it like fish to water. I mean, And we had never trusted one another because we weren't trustworthy. Neither of us were trustworthy, so we couldn't trust ourselves or the other person. And we just made that 180, and what a difference. And so the women in Alcoholics Anonymous knew that I was safe. And they just brought me into their little private house meetings of women who were struggling to heal from their incest. And then I got a good trauma therapist, and she took me as far as she could. And then there was still something missing. And I found Pema Chodron. And Pema Chodron is an American-born Tibetan Buddhist nun. And she became that just at a time when the Tibetan Buddhists made a decision to kind of make public release this century-old technique called Tonglen, Tonglen. And she became a master teacher of it. And it was so easy to understand. And this is stereotyping, but if most meditative techniques are about breathing in the good, the God, the light, and breathing out the dark, the anger, and the fear, then Tonglen's the opposite, where you breathe in suffering, and then you breathe out the antithesis to the solution to that suffering, starting with yourself. I can breathe in my terror and self-sabotage and rage over the incest, and breathe out spaciousness and compassion and mercy. And I start with me, and then extend it to any child on the planet who on this day, in this moment, is being abused, raped, trafficked, incested, molested, whatever words you put on it. And then you extend it to anyone who has ever experienced that. And because I'm a mental health professional as well as a health professional, I know that most, if not all, I know that not all victims become perpetrators, but that almost all perpetrators have been victims. And I looked at my perpetrators, and it was the man of the house and his father and his young adult son. So I've got 3 generations of men raping me. And before I was on the scene, when that young son was younger, he was getting it from the father and the grandfather. And before he was born, the father was a young boy, and he was getting it from the grandfather and whomever else, uncles. And it's generational trauma and generational abuse. And suddenly I'm doing Tonglen and breathing in the suffering of my perpetrators and breathing out the compassion and mercy and spaciousness for them as well as for me, and we're one. And while I've never been a perpetrator, I have suffered as a victim, and so have they. And that was like the last piece of my healing. So when you say, where do you find God? And when I can find God in them and my perpetrators, I think that speaks to the depth and the breadth and the love and the tenderness and the forgiveness and the healing of my God.
Thank you for sharing that. What a deep dive into healing. What an absolute wonderful deep dive, and so many resources that you mentioned there. Our question 8, this goes back to when we first got into the rooms, but maybe also at different times if you've done the steps again. Question 8 is, which parts of the steps were the most difficult for you?
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe.
Oh, that's easy. And yes, I have done the steps again and again and again. So the parts that was most difficult was the part I was doing. That's always the same. It's like, holy crap, this is like hard. I get I'm powerless, but unmanageable. I don't wear a trench coat. I'm not homeless. I'm not divorced. I'm not in a prison cell. My life's not oh, yeah, it is between my ears, and I keep acting out in this way, and Nancy and I are unhappy, and I'm overspent, and I guess it is unmanageable. Yeah, but step 2, I mean, don't dangle this shit in front of me. It gave me a lot of hope. Come to believe a power greater than yourself can restore you to sanity, but we're not going to tell you a single tool. We're just going to say it can happen. Well, how? What do I do? Is there a lamp I rub? Or so that was really hard. And then turning your will and your life over was so hard. Everything is hard when you've not done it before. And then you encounter it. And somebody said to me, "Oh, honey, don't you know none of the steps, not a single one of them start with the words easily or cheerfully? Do them anyway. In fact, work the fucking steps or die." It was like, holy shit, you're kind of serious about this, aren't you? And thank God they did. That's at Southern California sobriety. Work the steps, motherfucker, or die. And there's such an emphasis on the step work and doing it with the sponsor and doing it again and doing it again and taking a deeper dive and doing it thoroughly that it gives us a foundation, and we're pushed to be of service, man. And none of it was easy. And most of it was life-changing. I'm not hurting anyone but me. I'm the victim here. If you'd had the childhood I'd had, you would drink or use too. Just write the 4th step, Jay. But just write it. Okay, column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4. What was my part in it? You're crazy. I didn't have a part. Well, let's talk about it. And suddenly I realized I do have a part. So what did you do when you became a young adult to heal your incest? Oh, I started shooting dope and sucking dick. Does that seem like healing modalities to you? Well, no, but so I could have gone to a therapist. I could have sought all sorts of help, and I didn't. I just wallowed in victocrat mentality, and that the world owes me and blaming others. And man, when you make other people responsible for your misery, you're also making them responsible for your joy. Like, I can't get it on my own. I was one of those who I had that black and white thinking. Every single person in AA is happy except me. And I was running around asking people, what do I need to do to get happy? What do I like? And some old timer, this was a long time ago, he said to me, kid, stop worrying about what to do to get happy and just stop doing the things that are making you unhappy. Changed my life. And I didn't know what the things were that were making me unhappy until I did the step work. And sitting down with a sponsor and reading that stuff was terrifying, but it was middle of age 75. Those 5th step promises came true. And 6 and 7, I didn't have a God that didn't believe at that point in early sobriety in a God that would reach down and pluck my character defects. So it was up to me to identify what a character defect was. Character is defined by behavior, and behavior alone, not your intentions or your thoughts or your feelings. Oh my God, I didn't intend to run into those children in the crosswalk. Yeah, but they're still dead. We don't care what your intention was. You killed them. So that idea, character is defined by behavior. So character defects are behaviors, not feelings. Fear and loneliness and anger are feelings. They're God-given. I can't summon them. I can't dismiss them. They're not character defects. What I can choose is my behavioral response to the feelings God gave me. In the face of fear, I can choose cowardice or the behavior of cowardice, the behavior of courage. In the face of rage, I can choose the behavior of vengeance or the behavior of forgiveness. In the feeling loneliness, I can choose the behavior of isolation or reaching out.
Let's get down to it, which is our question 9. which character defects give you most trouble?
Oh, that's easy. Still looking for the recognition. If you tell me I'm doing a good job at 3, 4, 5, and 6, you're going to give me less torture because I'm performing and you're going, good job, attaboy. That's me today. Still looking for, and it comes out in the form of being what I think is cute and clever. It's not. So log cabin, we always say, or pre-pandemic when I was there, and do we have any out-of-towners? And she raises her hand and says, I'm Sally from London. And I yell out, smashing. And the room laughs and I'm filled with, and then somebody says, I'm Joey from Mobile, Alabama. And I say, well, bless your little heart. And everybody laughs. And then some guy says, and I'm John, I'm visiting from New Jersey. And I say, oh, sorry. And everybody laughs. And then the speaker speaks, and then it's time for sharing. And the guy from New Jersey raises his hand. And he says, I just flew in, I'm John from New Jersey. I just flew in to bury my mother. And I got to tell you guys that you're making fun at my expense of my home state does not make me feel very welcome. Ouch. In your little group of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's like, ouch, shit, that wasn't my intention.
Oh, road to hell plastered with good intentions, as they say.
And that, but it was, I'm getting the validation from the room because they're laughing at my little wisecracks. And the room felt just as guilty as I did, but I'm the one who did it. And I said, I apologized to him, but, if I take a nice ceramic plate and I drop it on the ground and it breaks and I go, oh my God, I'm so sorry, plate. It's still broken. Damage is done.
It's still broken, yes.
And I don't know if you want to hear it, but I got another story of doing that not that long ago that just was horrendous. And I still struggle with that kind of core thing of if I can be cute and clever enough, I won't be hurt. I'll get your validation instead of your rate.
Have you, you have been through the steps many times. You've clearly worked with therapists and so on and so forth. And the one question that comes to mind, it is so obvious that this comes from a place of such deep hurt and trauma and of cruelty, really, that was inflicted on you. I suppose it is understandable that this would still inform your behavior today. It wouldn't be human if it didn't. So even if it comes out in such ways that you find not great at times, is there any compassion there for yourself that this is also because of what has been your life, which has had some terrible cruelty in it?
Absolutely. And then that's, it goes back to step 9. And I guess there's, I don't know why, but I think there's controversy around 8 and 9. 8 says we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to I went on the list. I'm part of all persons. And then it says 9 is made direct amends to such people. That was my first amends in a mirror with my sponsor at my side, in a mirror, out loud, eyeball to eyeball, not eyeball to forehead or eyeball to chin, eyeball to eyeball, formal. Hey, my name is Jay Westbrook and I'm an alcoholic and I'm sober today in a 12-step program, the 9th step of which is about making amends. And I'm here to say, and I went through all the things that I did this and it caused or cost you this consequence. And these were the character defects at play, and finished that list and then said the ABC. My intent is to not repeat these behaviors. Tell me if there's any other way I've harmed you and what can I do to set these right? And then I closed my eyes and waited for the switch. And when I felt it, I opened my eyes as the person to whom the amends had been made and spoke to the guy in the mirror and forgave what I could and identified what I couldn't forgive and what would have to happen before I ever forgave that. And I got up from that mirror. free. And every sponsee that I've taken through that sits down and feels absurd and giggles for about 10 or 12 seconds. And then it gets real fast. And so, yeah, I do the forgiveness work and I keep reaching for the greatest gift of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is the pause. If I can just pause for a heartbeat, use my seventh tradition filter, is what I'm about to say or what I'm about to do, self-sabotaging or self-supporting. Use my first tradition filter, is what I'm about to say or what I'm about to do going to create greater separation or greater unity. Use my 11th tradition filter. As my loving God stands at my side, would that God find what I'm about to say or what I'm about to do to be attractive? And if not, then I don't say it. But none of that works without the pause. And if I'm just desperate to get your attaboy, something's going to come out of my mouth that's cute and clever to me, but separating or self-sabotaging or disappointing to a loving God.
Yeah. Thank you, Jay. Our question 10 is, what is the best thing recovery has given you?
Everything in my life could be stamped. Obviously, you know my story. Everything could be stamped property of Alcoholics Anonymous because I got here on the day of a very well-planned suicide. So the 180-degree change in my relationship with Nancy, we got the tools to transform deep loving feelings into consistent loving behavior. I got Jay, I got a God, and then a loving God that I have an intimate, personal relationship with, not the kind of God that Kushner talks about that is like a European monarch trotted out on ceremonial occasions and who's loved by everyone because he has no effect on anybody's life. That's not the God I want. And I don't want, I'm in the South now. We got some, fire and brimstone kind of people, and there's a hell and there's a heaven and and I have a loving, forgiving, patient, sweet, tender God. So all of those things. Then my career and what I've been able to do in working with the dying, with death and dying and grief and loss. I did hospice nursing for 33 years. I've been a grief and loss counselor for 31. I continue to do that with people who have death-related losses, pets, parents, children, siblings, friends, and non-death related losses. Loss of hope, loss of faith, losses of childhood incest, losses related to dementia, to divorce, to breakup. It's absolutely amazing that I have gotten to serve. And maybe I got too much time on my hands down here in Tupelo, Mississippi, and we're a small town, so when people fly in to visit from Los Angeles, they fly into Memphis, and I drive up there to the Memphis airport, and you just drive right up the highway, and you make one turn left, and you're on the right place because there's this big purple and pink strip club. And right next to it is an auto body shop, and it's called Westbrook Auto Body. And I was sort of sitting here with too much time on my hands and thought I should design a little business card. It says AA repair shop, Unity Recovery and Service. And I thought it was cute and clever.
It is cute and clever.
And then I thought, holy shit, no, this has so much more depth because AA obviously is Alcoholics Anonymous, but repair, RE means again, and pair means to bond or connect. And that's what Alcoholics Anonymous has done. It's reconnected me to a loving God, to myself, to Nancy, to a purpose for living, to live fully, love deeply, serve others, and with a set of tools and principles by which I can live that purpose. The AA repair shop for me has greater significance than just cute and clever.
Yes. Thank you, Jay. Question 11. What would you say to a newcomer or someone wondering if they're an addict?
Hey, y'all, welcome. Why don't you grab a seat? Can I get you a little bit of coffee? And you might try and listen. You know, I know when I got here, it was hard to listen to anything but my own head saying my life wasn't unmanageable and this wouldn't work. And if you'd had my childhood, I'd drink too. And it turns out none of those things were true. And I'd never know that had I not stayed and had I not listened. And, you know, listen for the music of AA. Listen for the honesty and the vulnerability and the laughter and the love. Listen for the similarities. Don't worry about the label. You know, maybe you just use a little too much. Maybe you're a hard drinker. Maybe you're a problem drinker. Maybe you're an alcoholic. Here's what will happen. At the very least here, spiritual fellowship will spring up around you. You get some good entertainment. You get some tools for living. And if you choose to leave, nobody's going to stop you. But if not this, what? And if not now, when? Why don't you just give it a shot? Because not many people find themselves in a meeting because they just drank a little bit too much champagne at a wedding this weekend. You know, that's not why people stumble into our rooms. So like I said, welcome. Have a seat. Can I get you a cup of coffee?
Thank you, Jay. And last but not least, question 12. What do you want your higher power to say to you, quote unquote, at the pearly gates?
So my first response is to be cute and clever and say, Jay, we've got good news and bad news. The good news is there's AA in heaven, and the bad news is you're tonight's speaker.
Hey.
What I'd love to hear and hope to hear are, welcome, we're so glad you're here. And if you'll just step inside, Nancy and all the dogs are waiting for you.
Thank you, Jay.
God bless the broken road that led me straight to you. Led me straight to AA, led me straight to Nancy, led me straight to God.
Jay, thank you so much for being my guest today. You are a source of inspiration and of wisdom. And you have so many resources that you mentioned and so many stories to tell. I don't think it'll be a surprise to anyone that you are, of course, a published author. Would you like to tell us about your books?
Sure. I thank you so much for asking. I said earlier, and your audience may not know because they can't see me, I'm old. And what's really sweet is that I've gotten to leave a legacy of both aspects of my life. The first one is my work with the dying and the grieving, and I have a book called Compassionate Journeys, Lessons from My Work with the Dying. Compassionate Journeys, Lessons from My Work with the Dying by G.J. Westbrook. And it's this beautiful set of 28 standalone stories, each of which illustrates a tool for co-journeying with the dying. I am so proud of it. It's such an amazing work. And then 2 weeks ago...
Oh, hot off the press.
Yeah, hot off the press is my second book, and it's called Relationship Resilience, Applying the 12 Traditions to Relationships. Relationship Resilience, Applying the 12 Traditions to Relationships. And it's just written by J.W., because I have the steps and traditions in there. AA asked that I use my last initial rather than the last name as the author, and of course I did. And that is the magic that Nancy and I found. We found the magic bullet that allowed us to transform deep loving feelings into consistent loving behavior. And it's in the book, and each tradition has a filter and a set of inventory questions, and these work for all relationships, romantic, family of origin, in the rooms, with God, with self, with friendships, at work. And they are so powerful. And I do this workshop, 2-hour workshop for free on Zoom, wherever I'm asked, Zimbabwe, London, Alabama. I've done it all over the world, Lisbon, Portugal, Edinburgh, Belfast. Anyway, it just changes lives. People can't believe they've got decades sober and have never heard somebody make the 12 traditions personal and usable, that they can apply to their life starting today and see change immediately. So, like I said, I'm old and I'm so grateful that I get to leave this double legacy. One of the work I've done with death and dying, grief and loss, and the other, my 12-step journey, except it's 12 traditions instead of steps. So I'm very blessed, without a doubt.
What a wonderful legacy, Jay. We'll make sure to put the names, the titles again into the show notes so that everybody can find it easily. Thank you again.
Yay.
Jay, it's been an absolute pleasure. I could sit here and talk, but I think we've come full circle. Thank you again for being my guest tonight on 12 Steps and 12 Questions.
Thank you so much. So honored.
We've come to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe. While this pod is based on the 12-step recovery program, it's not officially affiliated with any 12-step fellowship. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific, it's fully self-supporting and not-for-profit. And you know this next bit. It's not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, and it neither endorses nor opposes any causes.